It's very normal for us to think that human rights is this idea where there's this kind of slow, gradual increase in the level of human rights over time. But you may be surprised to know that the reality is it's not like that. And the human rights goes more like this, all the time. And it really depends on what type of governments are in place around the world, how mobilised civilian populations are. And I would definitely say that the only thing that's really going to take the arc of the moral universe in the right direction is for civilian populations to become more vocal, to get engaged more with the idea of protecting other people in society whose human rights are being violated. And this is probably in the last 4 years since I've been involved in this issue. One of the most difficult things in a country like Australia, which is a country full of very decent people, I believe that we are decent people, but one of the most difficult things to do in getting traction with an issue like this is trying to mobilise the indifference of the vast majority of the population. And I don't say that in a way that is castigating anybody in any way at all, but very hard for people who live in a country like ours, which is in relative terms prosperous, and a lot of the population enjoy their rights and freedoms, don't really understand the idea in their daily lives of their rights being curtailed. It's very hard for those people to speak out on behalf of those groups in our society, those marginalised groups, such as refugees that we're responsible for, or Indigenous people, or many other marginalised groups who don't enjoy those basic rights and freedoms. To try and get all of us to speak out on behalf of all of those who don't enjoy that is very challenging. And so in commenting on that, I would say that the only real way we can get that arc moving in a more sustainable way in the right direction is to find a way to reach large groups of civilian populations, the Australian population, and get them to understand or to feel that it's important to speak out on behalf of those who don't enjoy all those benefits. Otherwise, it's never going to change. So, that's my comment.
So this week we posted a Facebook ad for tonight. And so one of the things that I noticed was the large number of people that wrote the most inhumane comments on the poster for tonight. Anne was very busy hiding comments.
Oh yeah.
Because there is in our culture, this thing of those who seem to have to my mind, as I saw many of those comments, they were largely uninformed. They were comments, people saying things that I know to be thoroughly untrue. Yeah. So do you have an idea of how, I know that you've said that civil society can move in that direction. So I suppose my big question is, what more can we do to actually move? So again, another big question.
Oh God. Good questions. Look, in a general way, if you talk to a lot of refugees, and I have a lot of relationships with a lot of refugees and asylum seekers who have been, I feel privileged to have those friendships and relationships with a lot of the people that have been subjected to this policy, and all of them say the same thing, and that is that they distinguish between the Australian people and the government. They all do. They understand that thousands of Australian people are supporting them and helping them not to feel alone. And the government's a different thing. So in talking about this idea, obviously the government has created a story about this whole issue that's not a real story, that's not based in fact. And this group of Australians, decent Australians who are a little bit indifferent, have managed to believe that. And I don't blame them for doing that, for believing that story. It actually kind of sounds like it might be right. Of course, it's not right at all. And it's only been done for political purposes, to win power, to win office. And in striving to gain political power, they've been willing to sacrifice the lives of thousands of people. And also to instill fear, invoke fear in the population, and create this, this narrative that's not real. So, I don't know, looking at this whole issue, there are people who might write about that on Facebook. Facebook's a bit of a nightmare, isn't it? Yeah. But I would say that looking at this, I always kind of think of this whole thing as being the population being made up of this sort of 15 to 20% of the population who take an interest in certain issues, social justice issues in the country, to varying degrees. People like us in this room, or like the people I stood outside Kevin Hogan's office with you today, and everyone else who've been doing that every Thursday for the last 4 years.
Longer, I think.
Oh, is it? How long is it?
I don't know, I've lost count.
7.
Oh, 7. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? Just plugging away. And then you've probably got the 10% down the other end. You're never going to change their mind. And so don't even bother trying. And then somewhere in the middle, you've got this 70% of people, decent people, maybe haven't found a need or a reason to get informed, haven't made the connection between the plight of these people and their own situation. And I suppose really they're the people we're trying to reach all the time. It's okay about the 10% we're never going to reach. We'll just let them go. In fact, there's a very interesting report that was done a few years ago. And I think it might have been Yale University that did it, and they spent years researching the idea of social change. And all their research has shown that if you're able to mobilise 3.5% of the population around an issue, it will change. Very interesting. Of course, 3.5%, that's quite a few. What's that, like 900,000 Australians? But then, the Kids Off Nauru campaign, that I felt I was privileged to be associated with that. They delivered a petition to Parliament House for 300,000 signatures. It's a major achievement. And that definitely got in the mainstream media, that campaign, and that definitely had a significant impact on the time frame upon which all those children that were in prison on Nauru. I mean, how can we do that? But anyway, that campaign really worked. So, I don't know. I don't even hide those comments, actually. I just ignore them, really. But I don't bother reaching out. Yeah.
I think we hid them because we didn't really want to stir up a hornet's nest when we're actually coming together in a really positive space to hear positive things. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So it has been interesting standing out in front of Kevin Hogan's office for these years.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, I think, how Lismore, I don't know whether Lismore is the same as everywhere else, but we've got more horn honks that are positive than the one finger salute has. But mind you, there have been people who have driven past and have offered advice. So, yeah. So now some of that advice I wouldn't take on board. I particularly remember the day that someone yelled that we should all get a job. And the person I was standing next to is an employer who said, I wonder if I'd employ that person. And another person said, why don't you help the poor and needy first? And I yelled back, come and join me at the Winsome anytime. You can come and help out there too if you want. So we sort of think this thing of, it's only one issue. But there are many issues around about us. And yeah, of course we're aware of all of the issues. Oh, yeah. So how about I stick more to the script? Okay. Yeah. So, actually, this isn't in the script. So here's something to prompt you some more about that maybe flows on from what's the place of the arts in this conversation? Is that
No, that's a good question. Yeah, so a lot of people. I've been an artist for 25 years. It's only the last 5 years that I've really tried to use that this world that I've inhabited for so long to try and create a bit of change or awareness. You know, it's probably the most fulfilling time I've had as an artist in that time. But I actually think that art does work. Of course, when I say that, the idea of changing policies like this and getting traction is a collective effort amongst all of society. Every people involved doing in their own way, a way that suits them. People, you know, who are standing outside Kevin Hogan's office, or people who are on the phone to refugees and developing relationships with them, or human rights lawyers, or medical professionals, or teachers. So the arts has no special place in that group. It's just one piece in the puzzle. But it's very interesting talking to a lot of the Kurdish refugees that I've got to know, including Baruz, who all have grown up as children in Kurdistan, and depending on which part of Kurdistan you're in, for example, Baruz and a few of the other guys that ended up on Manus all came from the Iranian part of Kurdistan, where they're not allowed to express their language or culture at all. They're not allowed to learn their language. They're not allowed to dress culturally, celebrate their music and songs. And so they've all grown up in their childhood understanding that art and music and poetry is a form of resistance. Yeah. And it's like a form of peaceful resistance. It's not about being angry. It's about being persistent and creating work, artistic work or music from a place of love in order to engender change, because nobody likes angry people. And that's been a very inspirational thing for me in trying to work out how to approach this issue. And it's also kept them sane, you know, having to deal with this, you know, and their resilience, a key to their resilience is their ability to make their art and resist through their art peacefully. So I think art plays a big role. You know, films like lots of films, and including this one, I guess, and books, artworks, poetry. I mean, I guess the thing about art is really just storytelling. And whatever type of art you're involved in, you're just telling some kind of story. Even in a painting, it's a story. And the thing that we all love more than anything else, apart from the people we love, I guess, we all love stories. So I think art is a great way to try and create some change.
Yeah. So you mentioned Beirut just then. So can you tell us a little bit about your connection to Beirut and particularly the beautiful painting that you made of him and that process? What actually happened, you know, for you to be in that space?
Yeah, well, he's an amazing guy. I feel really we're good friends now, and I value that friendship so much. And I suppose that when I first started to make contact with him in 2018, when we were making the film, because we had all the interviews and everything, and I thought it'd be nice to have something in the film that's a little bit more kind of ephemeral, you know, something more beautiful and everything. So I contacted him, and he actually helped me to line up all the guys and to get their permission to be included. And I said, do you reckon we could use one of your poems? Because I'd read his poems about Manus, they're beautiful, and he said yes, and we formed this friendship then. And even at that time, I thought, gee, it'd be great to paint him one day. And I went to visit him on Manus at the beginning of 2019, but I got seized at the airport, deported from PNG. Yeah, my son was so proud. And so I didn't get to paint him then, because the sitting had to be with him. And but then he eventually got to New Zealand, and at the end of 2019, and we arranged that I'd go and stay with him for a week, which I did a few months later, and spent like a week in Christchurch, like having meals with him. He's got a little house near the local university in Christchurch, and where he's an adjunct professor. He's got an office there where he writes and lectures, and I stayed with him in the house, and he cooked. He's a terrible cook. So I said, let's just go out for meals. And I just spent a week talking to him about how he felt now that he was free, and looking back on that period of his life and what he was hoping for in the future, and all of that time I spent with him was pivotal in trying to work out how I would actually make a painting of him. And I decided to make, after that, he said to me that his greatest achievement was that he was okay. Kind of interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and that he felt that the government, because he was such a big voice, probably the loudest voice amongst that group of people on Manus and Nauru, the government tried to humiliate him, or they would never say his name, or they would, but he feels like he humiliated them by being through his peaceful struggle. And he's quite funny as well, but I've said that before, and he gets really upset because he says, I don't want people to think that I'm funny because I'm like a serious person. Ruin my image. Yeah. But he is funny, and he's he's very kind, very gentle person, not an angry person at all. But I think it's quite amazing to think about a guy like him, because one of the most interesting things about what he did was, in 2014 there was another Kurdish guy on Manus called Reza Barati who was murdered, and he was loved by everyone there, especially the Kurdish people that were on Manus. He was like this gentle giant, yeah, and he was murdered, and that was really a very important moment for a lot of refugees on Manus who, after that incident, decided that they would start to get really serious about their resistance against this policy. And for Baruz, that was a big moment, and so after that happened, he decided that he needed to really crank it up. But to do that, he needed to spend more time alone and change his social setup. So he started to spend more time by himself and not in his kind of cliques and friends, and because he thought he needed to lock down and do some work. And no one really knew about him then at all. I mean, and he spent the next few years, it'd be enough if he was just a writer, and a lot of people know about him because of his book, his beautiful book. But he also was a journalist, so he started writing opinion pieces for The Guardian and for the Saturday paper here and Sydney Morning Herald. He's had 7 or 8 opinion pieces in the New York Times. So that'd be enough too, right? Except he's an academic as well. So he's written 7 peer-reviewed papers about political science. He's got a master's in political science from a university in Iran. And he's a professor, an adjunct professor at 3 universities. So that'd probably be enough. Yeah. But he's a poet as well. And he's written a lot of poetry, published poetry. He also made a film about Manus called Chalker, Please Tell Us the Time, which won an audience award at the British Institute Film Awards in London. So that'll be enough. But he's also produced some theatre productions. So he's done all this by himself, and without being affiliated to any particular organisation or any group. And he did all of that by himself over a period of 5 years from nothing. Amazing, really. Yeah, amazing achievement. And I think that he has been able, there've been a lot of people who have been active. He's probably the one who's had the greatest amount of output, and I think what he's really done now is documented what's happened the last 5 years through his work. And that document is an archive that's very valuable for all of us when we look back, to try and learn about what happened, and to make sure we don't do it again. And that's like a gift that he's given us. And despite all everything that was inflicted upon him, he's given us that gift, like in peace. Yeah, it's very beautiful.
And that's, in one sense, that's